Hello, I'm Logan Grabo, and this is a presentation about my CO2 Dragster project. I attend Joliet Central High School, and I take Engineering and Architecture 2, and I will graduate in 2027. The first step that I chose when it came to creating my CO2 dragster was research. I had to analyze tips and recommendations when it came to things such as the shape of the dragster, what often works best for people, and what optimizes performance. I had to understand the different effects on the dragster's performance, such as drag, friction, and the aerodynamics. I had to recognize importance of shape, mass, and friction. So what shapes were best to actually put into the dragster? Where was the best places to put weight? How could I reduce excess friction on things such as the axles and the wheels? I typically found that the best shapes were the tier and hourglass shapes, and it was best to keep edges rounded. I also had to gather information on the easiest ways to simply construct my dragster, such as sanding, cutting, the best techniques to make it quick and easy while still looking sleek. And then finally, I began hypothesizing on the eventual design I was going to use on my dragster. Then came a very crucial step, and that is sketching. This is where I actually had to take my research and my concept and put it onto paper, sketching out and using dimensions and best practices to ensure I had an easy to understand visual representation of what I wanted my dragster to look like. I had to actually measure the wooden pieces and the axle pieces I was given so I could ensure that my sketch was accurate and would be easy to transport into a 3D model. I did then sketch out and place the holes for the axles, the CO2 cartridge, and the eye hooks. I definitely had to consider weight distribution, shapes, edges the most here, as this was about the final step where I finally decided what I wanted my dragster to look like. Then came 3D modeling, which I simply had to model just the body. I had to take that sketch I made of the body and put it into Inventor so that I could easily model it for better accuracy on a technological scale to ensure that it was clean and easier to visualize. I used my dimension and was consistent. I also used material and color so that the visual accuracy was as in close to what I wanted my dragster to look like as possible. This would make it easier to actually construct in real life as well. Then I took that 3D model as well as downloaded models of the axle wheels, the straw, eye hooks, and the cartridge and combined them into an assembly. This what I would do using joints and constraints, which would help me ensure that the wheels could move and turn properly, spin, and nothing was not constructed in the way it was supposed to be. That way I could also ensure that I knew what I wanted my dragster to look like when I actually put it together and what process would be best when putting it bit by bit. Then I had to create an exploded assembly on Inventor using that assembly. I would use the tool tweak components and simply pull apart what the assembly looked like and explode it. This way each part could be seen in the way it was supposed to go into each other. I would separate the pieces as far as I could so that from a isometric um, southeastern view, you could see each piece and how they lined up into the actual main body. Next came the working drawings. These are somewhat important. These are professional drawings that I used on Inventor of the actual parts. I had to dimension them all here. I had to complete a full set, essentially a packet, but digitally, of every drawing and add them all together. I would start with a title with the assembly and then exploded and then drawings of each piece. Each piece was dimensioned itself. That way you could get a better accurate look at each piece exactly. I then had to include full title block and scale info and ensure that that was all cleanly done and that you could easily find that when looking at each drawing. Finally came, obviously, the most important part, the construction. The way I did this was to print out the front and top views of the car from my working drawings. I then had to cut out those models and tape them to the piece and then trace around them. That way I could get an easy understanding where I wanted the shapes to be on my actual CO2 piece. Then I would cut and drill out the shapes. Mostly I cut using a whittling set, and I would drill just the holes. I was making sure I was trying to be as clean as possible, but I would also sand down all the edges to smooth out as many digits as I could and ensure that there were no extreme gnashes in the wood. Mark holes before you drill and use a pick for the eye hooks because those are significantly smaller. And try to keep the drill as straight as possible. Also, finally, before we actually move on to painting, it's very important that you test all the pieces together. So kind of take your axles, your straws, your wheels, put them all into the piece of wood before painting. Obviously, you don't keep them there as you still have to paint it, but that way you can test if everything's working properly, what you might need to alter, sand down more, if a hole maybe needs to be a little bit bigger, so you can ensure that everything's working before you move on to the next step. That next step would be painting. This is possibly the easiest step. After you've ensured that everything is properly cut out and smooth and sanded down in the shape you'd like, you want to paint. Now you could use spray paint or regular paint, wood paint, whatever. They all work, but if you do use spray paint, it's important to use glove and glasses. You don't want to get that in your hands, and you really don't want to breathe that in. Ensure you get every side, try to keep it as even as possible and look as clean. That way you don't have a bunch of light marks on the dragster, because that doesn't look very good. Then let it dry completely. If you need to add multiple coats, do so. But what I found I needed to do was take toothpicks and even the axle pieces and insert them into the holes to get any of the excess dried paint that collected in the holes out, so that wouldn't cause issues when I was putting them in. Make sure you do it with the axles and not the straw, however, as if you do them with the straws, you may bend or accidentally break the straws, and that's not very good. But the axles are much stiffer and would be fine for that. Unfortunately, when it came to the most important part, which was race day, I, however, was not there that day, so I wasn't able to actually test my dragster in a race, but I did do test drives when I made it at home. My general tip for that would be to just ensure that your eye hooks are as centered at each other as possible and that string can stay on it. Otherwise, when you put them onto the string, they'd wobble around and that could cause significant issues when it's racing. And it could even cause it to break as well. So ensure that everything is on there firmly. If I had on my self-reflection, if I had to make sure I would go back and do one thing, it would just be to reduce my absences at actual school while creating the dragster. Obviously, I think the dragster could have looked a lot better, been a lot easier to make had I had more professional tools like that in the wood shop rather than the riddling set and I had a Dremel and a sandpaper at home I had to use. If it was more refined and I had more time, I would have loved to have made a more complex design. Unfortunately, because I procrastinated a lot and I just simply wasn't there, I was not able to craft something much more unique and much more in what I actually wanted to do with the car. So if I could go back, I definitely ensure that I did that. Although it does work and function properly, it definitely could have been better. I wish it was amazing. I wish I had even found some spray paint for a better color. I like the orange, but I do wish I had a true red. I think that just fits the dragster more. And that's it. That's all I have to say about my project. If you have any questions regarding this, you can go that my email is grabo.l@student.jths.org. I also have a link here to my digital portfolio, which includes a list of all my work across my time in these classes, if you're interested in seeing that. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.